at 9:30.
Hi, I'm Zach.
No. The intro is posted. The intro,
Like
the
where
first
we ended
hour,
the break, right?
like going, yeah,
Okay.
after the break.
Okay,
Right.
cool. All right, welcome back, y'all. You've had some time to work through the exercises. What I'm going to do now is just go through the completed code. So I won't activate every theme and show you all the steps, but I will point out some important things that are worth knowing about. So let's start off in our 1.2 exercises, and I'm actually going to be playing around with the completed ones because it has all the code already done. So if I come into my functions.php in my completed 1.2, what we're trying to work on here is dependencies. So we have two different versions of this, or I'm sorry, two different files being enqueued. We have a config file, and we have a theme file. And the important thing that we wanted to do was make our theme file dependent and load after our config file. And the way we do that is by passing in the parameter of the handle from whatever it is that we wanted to use. So in this case, it was JSP config-js, and that's what we're plugging in here. And then when we load the page, we should see one load and then the other after it. So that's our 1.2. In our jQuery example, there's two things we have to look at. One is in the functions.php. Notice that we are not enqueuing jQuery anywhere here. All we're saying is make it a dependency. And because jQuery is included with WordPress core, we don't have to do any extra work. It's just going to make sure that jQuery is loaded on our page. And I'm pulling in jQuery masonry as well here. Shout out to you, Dave, buddy of mine. Okay, and this URL is very important and worth going and checking out as well because it is going to show you all of the themes that come, or I'm sorry, all of the libraries that come bundled with WordPress. So some of them are a little bit older. A lot of them are like the jQuery UI library, and then some are very WordPress specific as you get further down. But some things, maybe like a Lightbox or different things, could be helpful for you. TinyMCE, for example, is used in WordPress internally. And then some internal WordPress stuff. Coming down, we see Backbone and Underscore are included, which we talked about why some of the features that built with that. And then you could also see the stuff that's removed. So we're way past the days of Scriptaculous and Prototype, although I remember them, no longer in WordPress core. So all I did was pull in jQuery. You may have played around with other ones. There's no really right or wrong way. And then the other thing that's important to mention is our actual theme.js file. And when we work with jQuery in WordPress, we cannot rely on the $sign just being available to jQuery. So what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, when this function is being called here, pass in jQuery to it and rename jQuery as a $sign when you pass it into the inside of this function here. So we don't need to use this. We can actually remove all of this and just type jQuery instead of the $sign. And a lot of WordPress core, some of the WordPress core code that you may see uses this method just because it's a little bit safer. However, for convenience sake, one of the reasons you're using jQuery is probably you want it to be easier if you are using it. So follow this method is very important. Otherwise, you'll get some unexpected results. Yeah, question?
So if you didn't include that, is the $sign going to default to a different library elsewhere, or is it assigned at all elsewhere in WordPress?
It's going to depend. I mean, this has existed since you still had people using Prototype and some other ones that were very $signy. So nowadays we don't see as much of that. So it would depend on what's loaded. It may actually still work, but you may potentially get some issues, I think.
You just want to make sure that you're saying which one you want every time.
Yeah, although I don't think, I don't think it's actually anywhere in it doing this for you. But you could test it out just by deleting this and checking it real quick. I'd be curious what you find. Yeah. But it's definitely, I mean, it's in all the docs and everything saying that you really want to work with it that way. Okay, so the next one up is enqueuing external libraries. So sometimes it's faster to load stuff off of a CDN instead of having it in your own repository, especially if it's something that's being used commonly a lot. So in this case, we're pulling in Vue right down off the repo. And then we're including it as a dependency, same thing as we did with jQuery. The difference here is that WordPress is going to try to attach this time code, or if we didn't have a time code, and let's just say that we left it blank, if we leave this blank, WordPress is automatically going to change it to the version of WordPress that it's in. So there's no way to set this to null, which is kind of annoying. Sometimes I wish that this worked, but it doesn't. So we're going to leave this as is and then use some WordPress hooks to make sure that nothing is added to the end of this. Because if we had version equal 4.8 and we tried to load that in the browser, it's going to give us an invalid URL, and that won't work. So that is not an option for us. So down here's some code where all I had to do was change CDN to unpackage, and that will make sure that this is stripped anytime that a JavaScript page is, or I'm sorry, JavaScript file is loaded. If it has this in the URL, it will not apply the version number, or it will remove the query argument of sort or of version. So depending on how much PHP you're familiar with. The other thing I could show you here is that if you ever start working with multiple CDNs, you could just do an or, and then this could be other, and it'll get a little nasty if you have too many of them, but completely valid, it'll work. So this block of code, keep in mind and copy and paste it anywhere that you need to remove that version number because it's breaking. I also left some code down here that you could uncomment, and what this will do is apply the same thing to any CSS. So sometimes CSS could be more forgiving. It does depend on how they're serving stuff up. But if, again, you're trying to link to some external CSS thing and it's adding a version number and breaking it, then you can run it through that filter as well. But you'll notice that down here I'm linking directly to a Google font and it doesn't break it. So that's pretty nice. But Google fonts are used to taking other parameters, so it's probably just ignoring those. Notice that it already has, like, you know, the stuff going on, the arguments.
So are both those necessary? You have to do the timestamp, and then you also have to remove the version number using that function?
No, you don't have to do time here. I'm just leaving it because it's not actually possible to set it to null. If we didn't do time and we left it this, it would set it to the version of WordPress.
Okay.
So I'm just leaving time, but maybe this would actually be a little bit more clear and make sense.
And then if you use that function, that's going to take care of the same thing.
It will actually solve it. This won't take care of the problem,
Okay.
and this won't take care of the problem. You actually have to go in and hardcore remove it itself, because it always wants a fallback so that even if you don't know what version you're on, it will be able to cache it based off of some data. And again, when you go to push to production for your own, you want to then start tracking these. So remove time and change it to like 1.5, 1.6. as you roll out new versions, and that will allow it to be cached better. Because if you have this, then it's going to assume that it's new stuff every time. Okay, so that's in queuing. Next, let's come down to conditionally loading. So this is something, as I mentioned, is helpful when you only want your JavaScript to load on a certain page. So for example, if we look at all of the different conditional tags that we can use, I don't know why. Sometimes I just like looking through this page. I don't know. It's cool to see what's out there. Is home, is it the front page? Is it a single page? Is it a single page with an ID of 17 or Irish stew? Or is it an array of things? Is it, there's so many different ones of these. Now, not all of these are appropriate, but some things like, is it a certain page? Is it the About Me page? If it is, then I want to load my JavaScript there, or I don't want to load it. So what I did is single, and this means is it a single blog post page. The other thing you could do is put a exclamation point in front of it, and then this will check to make sure that it is not a single page, right? We'll see some other stuff later when it comes up of, we could say, is it a specific page template, and we'll create some custom stuff to use this. So we'll come back to conditionals a little bit later. It may not apply to you, but it's helpful to know that it's there because there's nothing more painful than trying to remove stuff when you can't figure out how to get it off the page and it's your own code, right? So, all right. Last exercise. And this is super important. So if we want to get into the API stuff, we have to know how to pass data out to our JavaScript file. So the few important parts here is what file are we attaching this to, or what needs to have access to it. So in this case, it's JS4WP theme.js, and anywhere that that's available, it will make this available. We can name this whatever we want, but because it's in the global namespace, you don't want to name this something like, well, you probably wouldn't want vars anyways, like globals or something that's going to possibly be used by another app and then overridden, right? We do have to worry about that with JavaScript. So I always namespace it and then call it vars or globals, just depending on the mood I'm in. Or lets or const, I don't know, you can do whatever you want. And then here I'm passing out the URL of the site, which is one of the template tags, and there are literally hundreds of these. So this is where knowing the PHP and theme and plugin side of WordPress before we get into the JavaScript stuff is really helpful, because this stuff and blog info is very common anytime you're displaying the name of the site, or I could change this to description and things like that, and get different values out of it. So on the front end, I'm going to actually load this one. I'm going to come in and do 1.6. Queuing. Looks like I broke something. Sorry, 1 second. There we go. That's how you write a function. Okay. No? Help me out. Y'all. Oh.
Next line too, before the period.
Sorry, where?
URI parenthesis, is there a space? Does that matter?
Oh, wait, no. That is PHP. Nope, that should be right. Is that the right?
Is it maybe not on the completed
Oh.
one?
That's it. Thank you, sir. Okay, line 16. Ah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so 1.16 is loaded. Let's see, we should get our site now. Okay, and now notice that down here in the console, if I'll start in the theme.js. So in my theme.js, I now have access to JS4WP vars. Again, this is exactly what I named it in my functions.php down here, JS4WP vars. And then whatever the property is that I set. So the site URL and the site name are the two ones. And then when we load this, we're going to see this data. Again, not the original use case, but this is how we're going to pass things like nonces and the URL to access the API correctly into our JavaScript and get that. That's probably the most common things we'll be using it for. So for authenticating and for getting dynamic data that we need. Okay? So that pretty much wraps it up now. I think we fielded about all the questions we have. So if there's
There's
any...
one question.
is there? Okay.
Yeah, from the chat, just looking to see if there's a theme that uses Vue that you can think of as an example.
Let me come back to that later, because I'm actually going to, when we get in a little bit further, I have a Vue demo, and there are some, but I'd have to go back and look them up. There are more React and Angular themes at the moment than there are Vue, and there's more instances of people doing small stuff with Vue. Oh, I know a good one. Go to xwp.co. XWP is one of the WordPress VIP shops, and they recently rebuilt their whole site using Vue. So, great example. Cool. Any other questions? All right. Hi. All right, JavaScript. Let's do this. We've got enqueuing JavaScript in a theme. Now, luckily, in a plugin, it's not going to be too much different. There's basically just one line of code that's slightly different, which is how we link to the file itself. And then there's going to be an extra hook, which will not only let us put our code onto the front end like we did with a theme, but also load it in the admin area. So we should be able to get through these pretty quickly. This should look very familiar, right? What's the one thing that's different? I'll give you a hint. It's in bold. Remember last time it was something like something URI, scripts, child's template, something like that, right? So now we have a different convention, which is plugins URL. We still have the path name the same, but then the actual location of where we are is being passed in dynamically with file. Okay, so this is kind of the go-to default way of doing it, because if we tried to use a PHP code that gave us a link to our theme folder, that would not help us if we're in a plugin, right? So this code is going to give us the plugin, but everything else is the same. So no big differences there. The big difference comes from this, again, is the exact same, but we also have this option. So there are two hooks that we could use. We could use WP and Q scripts, and that will take the code that we wrote, and it will put it out on the front end of our site on every page. And we can do conditional stuff as well. And if we do admin in Q scripts, that will put it on every page of the admin area. Now, this may not be what you want. If you want to build a plugin that has a plugin page and you have custom code that you only want running on your plugin page, or you want to edit let's say you want to put some custom JavaScript on the edit page, you don't want that dynamically loading on the media page and all that other stuff. So there's some conditional logic we could do by passing in the actual hook in of where we are, and then making sure that it's, if it's not equal to the page that we want, this URL structure is weird. Top level underscore page underscore, and then the name of the actual page link. So when you're in WordPress, if you're editing a post, it's edit.php. If you have a custom plugin, it could be whatever you want. So this is whatever you want, but it's usually written more like this. So we'll assign the variable somewhere else, because you're going to use that URL in more than one place if you're building out pages. And then we have to use global to pull it into our function, and then we just concatenate the strings together. So top level page is going to be the exact same thing as we saw before. It's the exact same thing as this. It's just being abstracted out into its own variable. So again, what this code is saying, hey, if you're not on my plugin page, return now, which is going to end that function, exit out of this hook, and enqueue script will never run. And this is something that's fairly common in WordPress. It's saying, hey, if you don't have this ability, or if you don't have this running, die now, or exit out now, or return now, and stop. Cool? So this is not code that you need to memorize, and honestly, to go from what we learned today into building a full plugin and a full plugin page, I'll give you the template code, but it's not really something that you'd probably jump into without reading a bit more, and there's a lot of documentation. I have whole other courses just on doing that kind of stuff, so I wouldn't worry about it too much, but I do need to point out that this is the case, and it's worth practicing. So again, we have these three different options here. We can get it on the front end, we can get it on the admin area everywhere, or we can get it just on our plugin page. And so guess what we're doing? The links. Again, I put these up in the repo now, so if you look in the repo, you should see slides, so you could follow along if you want to click on any of these. Again, everything is documented pretty well. You can see this last link here now is on the codex, and it has some stuff that hasn't made its way over to the newer documentation yet. But what we're going to do for practice is just these three things. So the practice exercises are pretty much the same as before. Let's do the first one together. Make sure that it works, because we are in plugins now and not themes. It's going to be a little bit different. And then you could do the other two on your own, okay? So what we need to do first is get the files. So come back over to the repo and go into section 2 and queue a plugin and copy all these files. And then instead of putting them in your themes folder, paste them into your plugins folder. Okay, so now you should have all of those there, and we're going to close out the themes that we were editing, and let's drag our whole plugins folder into our theme editor. So we've got that code ready. And now I need to mention something about it on the back end. So there's a page for plugins. When you're working on these, please don't leave them all activated at once. You may start to get some compatibility issues because some of the code is shared and some of the stuff is the same. I tried to make it so that it would potentially work, but what I'd like you to do is when you're working on, for example, enqueuing the front-end JavaScript, let's all activate 2.1 together right now. And then when we're done with it, deactivate it like that, and then go on to 2.2. Okay? So everybody go ahead and activate 2.1 right now. And then in our 2.1 JS folder, we're going to come down into the README and just look at the instructions real quick. Okay, so we're going to open up a file called something PHP, frontend.js, and then we're looking for enqueue scripts. Okay, we know what that is. And then we just want to change the file name and then pass in file. That's it. Okay, let's check that out. So if I come into my JS for WP frontend.php, this is the information about the plugin. And then remember, like I said, sometimes WordPress will have conditional code at the beginning that will exit out of all the rest of it. So if somebody's trying to access this plugin directly, it'll tell them, hey, you don't have access, and kick them out. Okay, so change path to file.js to use plugins URL, and then pass it two parameters. This is going to be my first, and this is going to be my second. Okay, so I'm going to delete this code here. This code right here. Delete that. And say plugins URL. And it's going to take two parameters. And we'll do this easy way. We'll just copy this code, paste it in, and then copy file. And it's a second parameter, so they need to be comma separated. So you need a comma right here, and then file. Again, not trying to make your lives difficult, but this is the convention. Again, this is something that needs to become second nature. You need to be able to like remember, okay, I've got plugins URL, I put this in here, I put that in there, and from there I'm going. And now if we should be able to just come to our site, the plugin's activated. Notice I still have my JavaScript from before, but now I've got plugin.js loaded. Sweet, that's perfect. And it's coming from my main.js file, which is inside of my assets, JS main right here. Plugin.js loaded, okay? So now what you need to do on your own is work on doing the same thing, but you're going to change the hook so that it loads in the admin area. So deactivate 2.1, and then activate 2.2. Do your code, and then come back to this page, and when you open the console in the admin area, you should actually see that code running there, okay? And then the third time you do it, you'll see a special link show up in the admin area, and your custom code will only show when you click on that custom link, because that's our like plugin page, okay? So let's see where we are after 5 minutes, assess, and then come back, because again, it's only a little bit of copying and pasting. It shouldn't be too tricky what we have going on here, okay? Cool.
So where do you want to get before lunch?
So I'd like to get through the next section on Ajax, one example from it if we can, and then we'll actually be.
So the exercise solutions, and then.
Yeah, so if we go over 2.2, 2.3, and then if we do just 3.1, I'd be happy, and we'd actually be exactly on time for everything.
So getting through the solution of 3.1 or just assigning it?
We'll all do it together.
Okay.